So my name is Andrew Critch. Pardon me, I've got a hoarse voice from a radio favorites sing-along we had the other night, so pardon me for being a little hoarse. And my background is in math. I did my PhD in mathematics at Berkeley, and while living in Berkeley, I met Anna Salomon, who one day decided that because she had some free office space that she wasn't doing anything with, she wanted to run a workshop on rationality. And I was planning a seminar on rationality in the Berkeley math department. And so we decided to team up and put our curriculum together and run a workshop together with a few other people who helped out. And from there, sort of people liked the workshop and wanted to have a repeat, and we thought, no, we can't really do that. But there was just so much persistent insistence that Anna basically started a nonprofit so that we could keep running workshops and develop the art of rationality. Yeah, that's interesting. So certainly I feel my mathematics studies have made me a more precise thinker, and that's the reason I pursued them. But there's an interesting inverse, which is maybe one of my most early interests in rationality and my own psychology came from a conversation I had with my dad. Neither of my parents had an academic background, and so when I was really interested in math as a child, they sort of really didn't know what to do about it. And then when I was 12, my interest in math kind of started to wane. I started to get more interested in social things, and they were certainly happy about that. But then my dad was also a little worried that I might lose interest in math entirely. So he asked me, Andrew, I notice you're not doing math for fun anymore. And I said, yeah. And he said, why do you think that is? And of course I said, well, either I don't find it as fun, or I find other things more fun, and probably a combination of both. And he paused for a minute to think, and he said, well, Andrew, do you want to find math fun? And of course, being 12, I had no prejudices against choosing whether you want something or not. I just thought that's a perfectly reasonable question. So I visualized two worlds, one where math was fun and another one where it wasn't fun. And it just seemed obvious to me that the one where math was fun had more fun in it, so I obviously wanted that. So I said, yeah, Dad, I do want to find math fun. Seems like a good idea. And he said, well, go find it fun. And I thought, of course, yeah, right. Good idea, Dad, thanks. But how do I do that? And he said, I don't know, go figure that out too. So I kind of wandered off into this project of not only doing math, but finding a way to enjoy it and finding a way of developing a state of mind where I was most optimized for this activity called mathematics. And this attitude of optimizing my own mental state for whatever kind of rational behavior I think is helpful for me or the people around me or the world is really what fueled my passion for getting started with CFAR in the beginning and still does. So as an undergrad, I felt like pure math was the field that I had the most to learn from. It's been around for many centuries and been developed and honed by many great minds. So it wasn't about the field that I thought most needed contribution. It was the field that I felt would most contribute to me. And looking back, if I could tell past me, I'd also recommend that he take more computer science courses and more economics courses. But I think it was a decent decision, and I would totally recommend anyone else to do a math undergrad. Yeah, so my PhD thesis was on applications of algebraic geometry to machine learning, which is kind of a new field. You can call it algebraic statistics. I think it's super awesome. It's algebraic geometry is not a field that's typically thought of as applied. And whereas I had a hobbyist interest in artificial intelligence, machine learning, statistics, general data science, I was really excited to start seeing connections there and find an advisor who was also excited about that. So that's what I wrote my thesis on. Okay, well, why would anyone be interested in rationality? And the answer is rationality is almost tautologically the thing to be interested in. So you ask why rationality, why we want to be explicitly interested in rationality. And first, let me say what I mean by rationality. I mean following a procedure that makes you likely to achieve the things that you care about, which hopefully includes other people. Rationality is not about being selfish. You can care about the world, and it can be very rational to act on that caring. So that's what I mean by rationality. And why then might one be explicitly interested in studying rationality or improving rationality rather than just directly improving the skills that one needs to achieve one's specific goals? And the reason is that certainly we all know human beings have limitations, but one of the wonderful things we discovered in the past 50 years or so in psychology and cognitive science and economics, all these new fields, is that humans share a lot of limitations in common with each other. And you may have heard of the work of Kahneman and Tversky, you may have read Thinking Fast and Slow, you may have read Predictably Irrational. People have errors in judgment that they make predictably. And at CFAR, our attitude is that if there's an error you can predict, then maybe it's an error you can overcome. And, you know, in a lot of aspects of our life, these small errors are probably irrelevant and aren't very important and may even be helpful in saving us time thinking. But at CFAR, we also care a lot about the long-term, health and future of humanity as a whole. And what we want is, when it really counts, when people really need to make a really careful, well-reasoned decision, that they have the mental skills and tools to debug themselves in that process and make it more likely to have a positive outcome from that decision. If anything, actually, I think that the people we most are concerned with putting off with references to evolutionary psychology are people who realize how flexible a theory evolutionary psychology is. So it's sort of, you can kind of make up a post hoc explanation for almost any observation with evolutionary psychology. It's of course a very important sanity check. If something's evolutionarily completely implausible, it's useful to rule that out. But there are many things which are evolutionarily plausible, so it doesn't let you really get down to a precise hypothesis. So I personally tend not to use it as a justification for any particular conclusion very frequently, just for that reason. Curriculum development has been my main input to CFAR. There are other things we all do, but that's been my main focus. And our methodology for curriculum development is, I'm really happy with it. It's to my eye now a very beautiful thing that's happening. What we do is we start with an observation about ourselves. Like, hey, I notice I'm making this kind of error, or I notice I made this mistake. I wonder if it's systematic. And then, we'll try, or we'll have tried, or someone we know will have tried some kind of hack to sort of overcome that error. And we'll try it out and we'll play around, and a lot of times we won't find it works, and we won't find a way to make it work. And that's our first sort of ruling out that we go through. If we can't do it ourselves, then we're not going to be able to teach it. So the next phase is, suppose we find a technique that's useful for us. Like, example, I want to remember to, use my to-do list when I get home. So I practiced. This is something I've been doing since I was about 12 years old. If there's a habit I want, I'll set aside a little time to actually practice the habit. So I'll walk in and out of my room and practice entering the room, opening my to-do list. I found this to be a tremendously useful mental hack. To help me turn my sort of rational ideas into actual physical actions that I'm likely to execute. And so that's an example of something that we played around with and found that we could also teach to other people, and they found beneficial. But then there are many other things that we just try conveying, like, hey, why don't you try this? It just doesn't work. Just turns out not to generalize very well to other people. And I think that's a good sign. It means that we're not getting positive hits all the time. There is actually a filtering that goes on. And once a technique that we're trying to teach goes through several stages of, volunteers testing it, trying it, giving us feedback, talking to us on the phone, telling us how well that worked for them. Then we try and make it into a 1-hour unit that we can teach, and if it passes the test of it's teachable in 1 hour, a person can benefit from 1 hour of instruction in this technique. If it passes that test, then we include it in our 4-day workshop curriculum. And so we're kind of this, you can imagine sort of panning for gold. We're sort of filtering down all the most dense sources of rationality and mental self-hackery that we can find, and then putting that gold into a 4-day workshop. So that's our curriculum development process, and feeding into that is reading of the cognitive science literature, talking to psychologists, talking to economists, talking to each other, all this self-experimentation, and of course data we collect from our previous workshops, which actually have included exactly one randomized controlled trial where we took the financial hit of throwing away an entire workshop worth of participants because we wanted to track how they would perform with all the interest and talent and dedication to rationality that they already had that would feed them into our workshop, but without our training, just to distinguish them from the people who actually managed to come. So that's a longitudinal study, hopefully of which there will be more, but that's certainly also feeding into our curriculum, the data we're collecting from studies like that. So why did I want CFAR as an organization to exist? Yeah. And my personal motivation for getting involved and trying to get CFAR to happen is that, number one, I want there to be a lot of people in the world who are dedicated, diligent reasoners, who are ready to question themselves, question each other, and learn from each other, and really work together to form an accurate opinion about the state of the world and how the world works. So I want diligent reasoners in the world, number one. Number two, I want there to be, among diligent reasoners who have a real clear picture of what's happening in the world, I want there to be doers, people who take action on their reasoning and who are competent in business and leadership and communication, who can really make something happen when they see something that needs to be done. And three, I want among those people there to be good people who, of course, good is there's plenty to debate about what it means to be good, but I think there's also plenty to agree upon. And I think there's enough correlation in human beings' senses of morality and ethics that having more people working together, questioning themselves, questioning each other, taking action, and really caring, that's CFAR's mission, is to create a network of people with all three of these properties. And the reason CFAR needs to exist on the margin is that there are many groups that are oriented towards creating well-intentioned individuals. There are many wonderful social movements and traditions that try and cultivate ethics and morality in people, and that's fantastic. And there are also, there are business schools. Business schools try to teach the skill of business, the skill of taking action and really, implementing your ideas. And then there are also, various kinds of training and reasoning, you could argue, like mathematics or economics or philosophy. But ultimately, we want there to be people who are and have all of these things, and who are working together as a network. That's also critical. If there's just a person on their own, it's not so much they can accomplish. So that is our mission, is to, and we've already got hundreds of alumni from our workshops, and we're growing. So we're on track, and hopefully our alumni network of diligent reasoners with competent action-taking abilities and really ethical concerns for the state of the world and humanity. Hopefully that network will continue to grow and proliferate. There's a lot of things that CFAR teaches that are sort of well understood by other groups. So we teach about habit formation as critical. We teach about emotional awareness. We teach about cultivating social skills and properties in yourself that you feel like you need. Many of these things are are pearls of wisdom that you could have taken from other groups and other movements. But there are still things that CFAR bring to this mix. We call it our soup of rationality ingredients that are missing and glaringly missing from many other approaches to just general self-effectiveness. And one of those things is Bayes' theorem. It's a theorem from statistics and probability theory, and it's really a formula for how to integrate conflicting sources of information, potentially conflicting sources, including people you disagree with, your own intuitions, which may differ from your explicit reasoning. We try to teach and use Bayes' theorem as a sort of lens through which to view disagreement and discord. We find it's not only, of course, if you've maybe read Nate Silver's book, The Signal and the Noise, and how he managed to use sources of otherwise highly biased information in a useful way by weighting it appropriately in a Bayesian framework. That's how he's able to, predict the election results so consistently and so impressively. So a lot of people have heard about Bayes' sort of statistical power, but we also see it as serving a very important social function. Our workshops practice trying to take apart the sources of a disagreement into, say, for example, you and I observe some evidence like, I see that the world's temperature has risen several degrees, and take this as evidence that, say, global warming is happening. And you and I might then disagree about whether global warming is actually likely to be happening. It's an extremely important question, and I don't think CFAR tries not to position itself on the answers to questions, only the procedures by which one should come to a correct answer. But supposing you and I have a disagreement about that, it's interesting to take apart the disagreement into, did we disagree before we saw that the world's temperature was rising? How much did we disagree? There's this term called a prior. Prior to observing the evidence, how strongly did you believe, that global warming is happening or not? And you can think of your belief on a spectrum. You can think of it in terms of an odds ratio or a probability. And it might be that even prior to observing rising temperatures, you were strongly convinced that global warming was happening, and I was strongly convinced that it wasn't. And then upon observing the world's increasing temperatures, you might very reasonably then lower your confidence a little bit that global warming is not happening, and I might raise my confidence a little bit that it is, and nonetheless still agree on our conclusion and need to seek out more sources of observation that you've had, that I've had, until we share all the data and experiences that we've had, and then maybe we'd expect to come to an agreement. But recognizing that you and I have both been moved in the same direction by the evidence that the world's temperature is rising is a nice social. It's like a gesture of respect to say to somebody, I still don't believe in global warming, but the fact that the temperature has risen has nudged me in the direction of belief. It's a nice concession to make, and I think it makes for more peaceable conversations and disagreements. So I think that's something that internally we've benefited from immensely, and I guess I can't talk enough about the value of, sharing sources of disagreement and using a Bayesian framework for settling those. Yeah, so what's a deep-seated belief that I've had that I've changed in response to evidence? So this might sound a little weird, but it's very personal and important to me, so I'll share it. When I was young, I kind of wanted everything to be simple. I wanted a simple understanding of myself and others. And it occurred to me that perhaps, probably when I was around 14. I remember I was 14 walking in the forest in a French island. I realized that I was very often trying to maximize the integral of the pleasure and enjoyment that I got in my life. And so I thought, you know what? I think that's going to be my purpose in life. That's my goal. That's what I care about, is maximizing the integral of my own happiness and excitement. And I wanted things to be that simple. And so, what now is apparent to me in retrospect as a profound rationalization, I, tried to explain all of my behavior in terms of maximizing my own pleasure and enjoyment. Like, oh yeah, I'm helping my friend out with this project, but that's because I know he's going to return the favor later. Or, I'm not breaking these rules and these laws, but that's because I don't want to get in trouble and go to jail, and so on. And so I tried to always explain everything I did in terms of benefit to myself, and I almost felt this was virtuous. It was sort of respectable that I didn't, that my values weren't contingent on such uncertain things as what other people might like or enjoy. And I believed this very deeply, but by the time I fell really, really in love with a girl, it took years, but I found it more and more difficult to explain my behavior in terms of maximizing my own enjoyment. You could argue that if I decide to be loyal to her, I'm avoiding guilt. If I decide to be loyal to her, I'm just optimizing for that split second of enjoyment and pride that I experience during that moment. But I just found it implausible. I did the math. I thought, how many moments of guilt would I experience? How many moments of pride would I experience? And do I experience when I decide to be loyal to my girlfriend? And the answer was just not very much in compared to how much she wanted me to be loyal. And I just couldn't convince myself anymore that I only cared about myself. And I think it was kind of stupid to take so long, but I suddenly realized it's perfectly mathematically consistent thing to do, to try and optimize the happiness of other people as well. And, maybe that sounds silly, but sometimes those biggest shifts in deep beliefs are things that are just totally obvious in retrospect, but which for some personal reason he just had this barrier to believing. And so I just admitted to myself that, yeah, I care about other people. And boy, has that been, a game changer. I mean, I would never have tried to create CFAR if not for, actually caring about the world, caring about other people. So I'd say that's my biggest update on evidence, was basically about what I cared about. So that's the attitude that I need the rest of humanity to survive myself, to make it myself. That's the kind of argument I would make when I'm trying to explain everything in terms of self-centered optimization. I'm never gonna live past 100 if the world doesn't solve important medical problems. I'm never gonna travel space unless the world can coordinate well enough to accommodate that for more people. So I would sort of justify, I'm trying to make the world a better place, but for me. And that's great. It's great to realize that plenty of altruistic behavior is so overdetermined that you don't even need to be altruistic to do it. But it took some really glaring examples of things that were clearly not for me to realize that I'm not just helping the world to help myself. I just care about other people, and I think that's normal. I think everyone really does, or I shouldn't say everyone, but I think plenty of people really do care, and maybe don't even realize it. Yeah. So I think a wonderful situation that human beings are in right now is that we have the ability to reflect on our instincts and notice situations where they're highly adaptive and highly useful versus not. And for example, say, if I'm about to get hit by a car, there was really nothing in the evolutionary environment to develop the amount of practice that I have at avoiding getting hit by cars as I have. Nonetheless, my brain's doing a wonderful job at jumping out of the way of cars when they're about to hit me, right? So thank you, brain, you saved me, or thank you, sometimes I talk to my brain, I really just mean whatever brain part's in charge of that. So thank you, amygdala, for avoiding that danger. But sometimes we clearly also have aversions or negative reactions to things that, upon reflection and thinking statistically about consequences, are really just not needed. Like, I've never heard anyone say, wow, thanks, brain. It's a good job. I was so terrified during that presentation I gave. So sometimes we can, through working together and thinking about consequences, realize that we just don't need to be afraid of public speaking, or we don't need to be afraid of ... We don't need to be disgusted by ... We don't need to be angry about ... So one of the units that I teach at CFAR is a unit where we just stop and reflect on, first of all, taking apart our aversions into pieces. Like, oh, I really don't like doing my taxes. Well, what aspects of it don't you like? Okay. Is it that you feel indignant that you ought not to have to pay taxes, and that feeling is persistent throughout the process? Or is it that paper just makes your hands uncomfortable and you just hate handling paper and the paper cuts that you get? Or is it that you don't like the arithmetic, or you find it difficult reading through all the rules, and it's, or you're annoyed by how poorly arranged the taxation system is and you wish it were just more optimized? Any of these reasons might be a component to why you don't like taxes. So first, breaking it down into pieces like that is the start, and then asking yourself for each of those pieces, is that like the jumping out of the way of a car? Or is that like the fear of public speaking? Is this an aversion that's pointing to an interesting problem in the world that I want to solve? Or is it an aversion that's sort of gesturing at nothing, that sort of indicates falsely that there's some negative consequence that really isn't going to happen? And if you don't take your aversions apart into smaller pieces, you risk throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It could be that some of the things you don't like about taxes are interesting problems that you could solve, like maybe you want to pay someone else to do your taxes. But some of the components might be just things that you really don't want to solve or don't really need to act on. Like, if you don't think you're ever going to become a tax reform activist, then maybe the feelings of indignation about your taxes are not really useful or helping you in any way. And if you can find a way through various techniques that we also discuss at our workshop, if you can find a way to just release that indignation and get on with it, don't go to jail, do your taxes, then that's the other kind of solution that you can find. When a lot of people break down what is rationality, I said it's a process for achieving what you care about, but CFAR is interested in human rationality and getting at the human component of what challenges does a human being face in trying to attain accurate beliefs and then take action on what he or she cares about. And this second one is it breaks down in a lot of ways. Some people use the phrase epistemic rationality for the art of achieving accurate beliefs about the world, super important. And then some people use the word instrumental rationality to refer to the process of achieving your goals. But for the purpose of teaching and self-debugging and being a human being, this second one really needs to break down. And I like to think of it in terms of three other smaller pieces. There's coming to understand what you yourself value, which is almost not an even entirely well-defined question. And then, so there's value awareness. There's also, competence in terms of execution, ability to come up with a strategy that's going to work. And then there's the ability to actually execute, the ability to get yourself to take, to move your body in the patterns that actually are going to execute your plan. So I think of instrumental rationality as consisting of, value awareness, creative strategizing, and then competent execution, or sort of self-coordination. And this number one, this value awareness component of rationality is a real bottleneck. It's not uncommon to talk to someone who says, I don't know what I want. Or I don't know what, or I want to be happy, I don't know what makes me happy. and somehow, transitioning from a state of uncertainty about one's own preferences, or the sense that, some parts of me or some parts of my mind have some preferences and some other parts of my mind are clearly steering me in a different direction. Like when I put the lollipop in my mouth, it tastes good, which makes me want to keep putting the lollipop in my mouth. When I stand on the weigh scales, it tastes bad, and I wish I, would just stick to my diet and lose some weight and feel healthier and look better. These are clearly parts of my mind that are pulling in different directions, and it's nice to sort of, compute a sum and settle once and for all, like, okay, how many lollipops do I really want per year? Do I want 0? Maybe I want 1 lollipop. Maybe I want 2 lollipops. And without a kind of, summary judgment of all these parts of our minds, we might just sort of jump to the conclusion that, like, in one moment you might think, no, I want to be healthy, I want to lose weight, I want to look great. That's my only goal. The lollipop is just a diversion. I don't want things that taste good enough to even consider them. But then another time you're like, no, I want to enjoy my life, I want to indulge, this is what I want, this is how I want life to be. And ultimately, we're both of those people. We're the same, we're the same body inhabited by different desires at different moments. And it's a challenge to sort of hold a meeting between all those different perspectives you may have at different times and get them to agree on a mission statement. And so I think that's a really valuable thing that we try to teach and help people with and learn at CFAR. So sometimes people debate about what rationality is. Is it economists might say rationality is optimization, and a philosopher might say, rationality is self-reflection or deliberation. And I just, a word is only as useful as it is, precise enough for the context. And I think once you're asking a question that requires precise enough thinking that you need to distinguish between optimization and deliberation, then you should just say optimization or deliberation. If you've ever played the game Taboo, where you have to somehow get someone to say hot dog without saying hot or dog or mustard, it's a great sort of mental habit to channel. Just taboo the word rationality. Just don't use it, because if you need more precise thinking, then don't sort of blur your brushstrokes with such a vague term as rationality. On the other hand, in a really simple statement, like, taking a moment to think rationally can really help you. Do we need to distinguish between optimization and deliberation for that statement to be roughly true? I think not. So then, in that case, rationality is a good word to use. Much simpler to describe instance of the prisoner's dilemma is a situation where I can steal $2 from you, and then one of the dollars gets burned on the way over to me, and then I get $1. And you can steal $2. Similarly, you can also steal $2 from me, one of which gets burned, and you get the other $1. This is equivalent to the prisoner's dilemma. It's easy to describe, and it's also easy to see that if you're purely selfish, you're not worried about your reputation, then the obviously best thing to do is to just steal from me. And obviously the best thing for selfish me to do is to steal from you, and we end up in a situation where we've burned each other's money and we're just worse off than we were, and nonetheless reflect on the situation and say, wow, it's a good thing I stole from him, or else I would have lost even more money. So that's what makes a prisoner's dilemma interesting, is that it's a situation where everyone, acts in their quote-unquote best interest, and moreover reflects on that and agrees with their decision in retrospect, and still the group ends up in the worst possible outcome of just burning resources. And actually, I sort of see a lot of ethics and social norms and outside institutions like the government and law enforcement as systems we've put in place to discourage participation in these negative sum games. Like, if I steal your well, why is stealing bad? Well, there's probably plenty of reasons, but one reason is that, if I steal your laptop, I get a laptop, but you lose your laptop and all the things that were useful to you and not me that were on your laptop. Or if I steal your car, you had plans for your car, you had your whole life built around your car, and now, that all kind of crumbles apart. And so I think avoiding prisoner's dilemma is like a really important problem for people. And mechanism design as a field is a great, context where I'm hoping more and more people will find more and more ways to avoid negative sum games happening in society.